Kia ora katoa, kia ora Aotearoa, kia ora matua, Timutimu. Tōku inga Ryan Te Raiona. So for those of you who aren't aware, this is Te Wiki o te reo Māori, or Māori Language Week, and I am Ryan the Lion, or for this week, I am Ryan Te Raiona, which is Ryan the Lion in Te Reo. Our special guest, how you can see nodding there, is the infamous Lee Timutimu, of many hats, achieving many things for the progression and betterment of Māori in general, but especially in tech, and was a guest in our 2020 series. So some of our guests this time around were part of the 2020 series. Some are new. So what we're going to do, before I hand over to you in a moment, Lee, to introduce yourself, please. But just to give people the idea, we're looking at 3 questions, which is a little bit about your personal journey with Te Reo. For those that have heard it, that's cool. Those that haven't, it'll be great. And it reflects on a personal story of the actual wider history of New Zealand. And the next one is what's happened the last 2 years since 2020. And the last one is what are we going to do going forward in the future? What are the thoughts? What are the passions? Kaupapa. So with that, may I hand over to you to introduce yourself for everybody, please.
Tēnā koe te raiona, tēnā koutou katoa, e te iwi e whakarongo mai nā ki tēnei o ngā kōrero. Ko Lee Timutimu tōku ingoa, he uri ahau no Ngāti Awa, Ngai te rangi tūhoi me Ngāti Parau. I tipu mai au ki whakatāne, engari i tēnei wā, kei kirikiriroa ahau, e noho ana. Kia ora everyone, my name's Lee. Yeah, I was born and raised in the Eastern Bay of Plenty in the town called Whakatane, but I'm currently living in Kirikiriroa, also known as Hamilton. Yeah, it's good to be back, Ryan, just to have a bit of a kōrero. After 2 years, it's gone by so quickly. I mean, shucks, yeah. What has happened? I actually don't know what's happened. But no, it's good to be sharing kōrero and sharing time with you today, just to reconnect and just catch up and update. Yeah.
Kia ora. Kia ora, thank you. And I've got a bit of an idea of what's happened in the last 2 years, or some of the things that you've been doing, really out in this space. So we'll get into those in a wee moment. But first, related back to the original post where I talk about, I get asked a lot, why don't Māori speak Māori, or why should I speak Māori if Māori don't speak Māori? And the ignorance or lack of education about the truth of New Zealand's history, and going back to the 1867 Native Schools Act and the attempt to stop the use of Māori language. So I thought, let's bring the history to life through personal stories, and I'll just chuck up some comments as they go. We've got a couple of hellos, so there's Brevis. So the idea is some personal stories around your personal journey with Te Reo, whether you're fluent or just learning or don't know a word. All answers are okay. This is part of the journey and the lesson for all the country. So I obviously know a little bit about your story, but for those that don't, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Look, my journey with Te Reo has been a bit of a sort of a journey of peaks and troughs, to be honest. But if I can just provide a bit of context and background around my, I guess, exposure to Te Reo. Both my grandparents were native speakers. That's both sets of grandparents, actually. So both on my mum and dad's side, so fluent. But of course, they were of the era and also of the age where they were impacted by the Native Schools Act, and they were actively punished for speaking Te Reo. So, and I guess that's kind of passed down to their children, my parents and my obviously aunties and uncles. Many of them weren't taught Te Reo. Because obviously their parents they weren't allowed to. So of course, if your parents aren't allowed to speak their own language, then they're not going to teach you that language, right? Because they don't want you to be actively punished when you get into the education system. So yeah, that's very relevant to, I guess, my whānau and their history, I guess, with Te Reo. Both my parents, my dad is a native speaker. He was fortunately raised with the reo, and he would be classified as a native speaker, so fluent. My mum is a second language learner, although she was exposed in the household, I guess, as most Māori whānau are exposed to te reo in some form, depending on what era you're living in, I suppose. But she went on to learn te reo later on in life, and then coming down to me, I would say again, when I was growing up, I was exposed to it quite a lot through my grandparents, but also my parents. My dad actually sent me off to the New Zealand's first bilingual school, Ruatoki Bilingual School at the time. That's what it was called. The first of its kind, and that would have been the early 80s. So, and then I guess that's where it was my dad's desire for me to learn our language. So his, I guess, response to that was to send me 1.5 hours from where I lived each day to attend school. On the bus, first on the bus, last off the bus, from Whakatane to a place called Ruatoki, out in the Uruwera, sort of out in a valley. And then I would spend an hour and a half returning home after school each day. So it was a big commitment, both time-wise, but also for me in terms of my learning journey. So that's really where I discovered my foundation, I guess, for te reo Māori. And so I would have left that learning environment, or that institution, I would have left there, I guess, almost fluent. I mean, like it's all pretty, fluency. It's kind of like what is who determines whether you're fluent or not. Well, we've got experts and leaders that would be able to determine those sorts of things. But anyway, then I went off to high school, went to boarding school, and in the Bombay Hills, St. Stephen's School, which is no longer there, very steeped in a rugby tradition. Also, it was the first Māori boarding school, actually. So back in 1844, I believe, was when it was established. So very rich, long history. Māori boys boarding school. I went there because I'm the eldest grandson, so it was kind of destined for me to go there. All 7 of my uncles went there as well. And then, continued my learning journey in terms of te reo. I took 6 subjects. My 6th easy subject for school C just happened to be te reo Māori, because, it was kind of easy for me at that time. So, and so I pretty much, continued to learn te reo academically anyway at high school. However, I wasn't in a te reo speaking environment. So although there was some te reo spoken at St. Stephen's School, it wasn't a full immersion environment. In fact, I don't think there were any full immersion schools at that time. Anyway, I was there from 88 to 92. Kind of the early 90s, I think, or the late 80s is when the kura kaupapa sort of wharekura movement started building up momentum, and that's when Hoani Waititi was the first, officially the first kura kaupapa in New Zealand, which is, of course, as you know, Ryan is the one out at Glen Eden there, out West Auckland, Hoani Waititi Marae, te wharekura o Hoani Waititi. So anyway, that was kind of me. I went to university, and that's where the decline of my te reo sort of knowledge began. So I didn't take up Māori language at uni. In fact, I did all accounting, sort of economics type commerce subjects, so I wasn't really had anything to do with it. And so that's where things kind of declined for me, was uni. And it wasn't until the next key milestone in my lifeline would have been when my first child was born, when I was 30. And I had 2 kids successively, I guess. And my 2 eldest children, their first language was te reo Māori. We put them through kohanga reo from day dot. Yep. Their first language was te reo Māori. So that's all they spoke. However, they were really great at switching between the 2 languages. And I remember all I spoke to my kids was te reo. Literally, I didn't speak any other language to them. And if I was speaking English to them, it was more so that other people could understand what we were up to, but largely we would speak in te reo all the time. And it was actually, I remember those moments, because it kind of felt like a code language. It was kind of like we were like being really, like secret about, talking about things or people or situations. It was really awesome, actually, because we'll be just like going hard in te reo, and me, my son and my daughter and I, and they were only like littlies at the time, but they were so beautiful in the way that they just spoke te reo, but also being able to switch between the two languages was just with effortlessly, actually. So, but then I got to a point where my eldest child hit the age of 4, and they surpassed my knowledge by then. In terms of my te reo mātauranga, they surpassed me by the age of 4. Yeah. So that's when it was kind of like a switch in my mind. I was like, oh, okay, I've hit my ceiling. I can't continue to converse with them anymore in te reo. And that's when I started speaking less te reo and more Pākehā, unfortunately. But that's how it all worked out for me. And since then, I've kind of not been in a te reo speaking environment as much as I would like to. Certainly my te reo language level is probably conversational at best. I try to use it as often as I can in both my written and spoken formats, but otherwise it's something that I really do aspire to return to in terms of learning my language, because there's so many situations where I feel completely out of my depth because I don't have my language here, and that really hurts me sometimes, and it makes it quite challenging when I'm navigating some of these very Māori environments, and I don't have my language like beside me in my kete or my tools, to be able to use to articulate what I want to articulate in here. I can't speak it in my own language. I can articulate it in the English language, not a problem, but it's quite different. So I think I'll leave it at that, because I've probably gone really a little deeper than we did last time. But yeah.
No, that's beautiful. A tahua. So, as you were speaking, there's different bits and pieces that relate to my family in some ways. So my brother, whose wife is Swedish, and the kids were born in Singapore, the kids grew up speaking English, Swedish, and Mandarin, and would use all 3 languages, talking as a 2, 3, 4-year-old without realizing. And I also happened to do psychology rather than commerce at university, and I was amazed that one of the facts is that the best window for learning multiple languages, or learning languages full stop, is 2 to 7. And I won't go into all the different bits and pieces, but when I think about it, if we were teaching Māori and English at kindy and primary school, then the kids from 2 to 7 would just grow up bilingual without really an effort. And then that would enable, like you talked about, going to university and things dropping off because you weren't in the environment. I was able to speak really strong Italian on my OE, and that was, two other things about languages, or learning languages, is that once you've learned the second one, the third, fourth, fifth get easier and easier. So I'd already learned French at school, averagely, but also a little bit of Māori from primary school, and the vowels. So the Māori vowels, Italian vowels are the same. The French and Italian language structure is the same. So my Italian just went and took off. And it's all good examples for if you're not in the environment speaking it regularly, then it does drop off, like my Italian has, and your te reo did. But if we have environments where it's regular, and that's actually the answer to question 3. We were talking about that earlier. What's the answer to question 3 in the future? We need to create environments where we can regularly speak te reo. Well, that's my little thought for us to think about later on. But yeah, so amazing story. And one thing, just when you're talking about school, it just reminded me, I was talking to you about my dad, and he recognized your last name. He said, "Did he play rugby?" And I've got a feeling he did, but he remembered talking about, I can't remember if it was age group representative, or if it was like top 4. I'm not sure, but the double Timutimu stands out. That's a Timutimu.
Yeah, it's very unique.
Moving on to question 2. I know it was a long time ago for me too. But moving on to question 2. So that was, what's happened in the 2-year gap since this first interview series in 2020, and a couple of bits and pieces that I put in there that are some starting points or highlights. Ko Māori Hangarau has really taken off this year, so I won't steal your thunder with the new aspects to this year, but it's been something you've been running for a couple of years, and it's been growing and picking up pace. So that's really exciting. And then, of course, the mention of meta and the work that you've done creating a Māori space for the metaverse. Again, I think your post said something along the lines of, we're a company of 5 or 6, and Meta's a company of 60, 70,000. And here we are building this Māori space for the metaverse. So yeah, really cool to have a little bit of insight. And now the next one is you've been invited to keynote in Denmark, and I keep getting the subject wrong, and I haven't been able to find the post again to get it, but it's around designing decolonization. I'm not. You'll correct me, please, but over to you. Whether you talk about those 3 things or anything else, other things. What's happened in the last 2 years for you that you've noticed?
Yeah, heaps happen, as you know, and as most people that probably listening to this now know, that we've done quite a bit in the last 2 years. I guess, just speaking to Ko Māori Hangarau, we founded that kaupapa in 2018 in Tauranga, and it was actually only supposed to be a one-off event. Myself and Awhina Ngatuere, my good friend whanaunga and our co-founder. It's a rangatahi tech summit that aims to inspire our Māori youth, of course, into pathways in tech, also innovation and also entrepreneurship on top of that. And it has gone from strength to strength. I guess this year we've been funded by the Ministry of Education to deliver 6 events in 6 different locations. 4 of those locations were firsts for us. We're finishing off that 6-event program here in my backyard in Kirikiroa next Wednesday. So awesome. Looking forward to that milestone event for us. It's the last, but also it's the first time we've delivered the initiative here in the Waikato region. So it's gonna we'll finish off. Yep.
What day is it?
Finish on
That's next week.
Next Wednesday. Yeah.
Oh man, because we're talking about on a Tuesday. Maybe I'll have to come back on Wednesday.
Yeah, come. Yeah, well, you know how we roll. So we're going to be at Hopu Hopu on the advice or the recommendation of the tribe, Waikato Tainui. We'll be at near the Waikato Tainui Endowed College, which is in Hopu Hopu on the hill. You can see it as you're driving into Ngaruwa Wahia. But we'll be down the bottom in the, I guess, the compound or the complex down bottom, in a place or a whare called Te Whakakitenga or Waikato Chambers. It's an amazing whare that is no doubt steeped with rich history, kōrero, and it's basically the place where the kingitanga have many of their hui and kōrero, and also many of the hapu and marae of the Waikato Tainui rohe as well meet there to have hui and kōrero. So it's really steeped in obviously tradition, history, kōrero, and we're very privileged to be able to finish off there next Wednesday. So I guess Ko Māori Hangarau, interestingly, we tried to integrate, incorporate a lot more te reo in our program, not last year, but the last time we were able to deliver, which was pre-COVID, 2019 sort of period, and it was awesome. And how we did that was we invited at least one of our speakers. We have a number of inspirational speakers that join us, and they tell their story about their tech journey, etc. But we had invited one te reo speaking kai kōrero speaker, and they presented everything in te reo. It was actually really awesome. So, but of course there were barriers of it's not actually a full immersion event. So you kind of have to balance or the 2 languages almost, and like you've got te reo and Pākehā or English in the same environment, and it's an event. So how do you navigate through the challenges of, basic things like communication? So, because many of our audience obviously are Māori, but many, I would say majority don't speak te reo. So it was kind of like, it was challenging in that we still did it anyway, because normalizing te reo is important. Speaking te reo
Exactly.
in these sorts of environments is important, because then it becomes normalized and then it becomes more familiar. We create the language learning environments, we create the opportunities for our people and the rangatahi to listen and then hopefully to speak te reo. But I guess that was really I think it was a good thing for us to explore what that meant to us as a kaupapa in terms of Maori hangaro, because it's not necessarily about te reo rangatira. It's not about our language, but it is about our people. And because our language is part of our people and part of our community, then I think it was an important moment for us to integrate or incorporate our language. We haven't done that since, but I would really love to integrate a lot more of te reo into our future programs for exactly the same reasons. Maybe not necessarily full immersion. Maybe bilingual would be a really nice balance, particularly for our audiences. But I hope over time that the language will become more normalized, and we won't be like, oh, what's this
Well,
language I'm hearing in this public space?
well, here's another one for question 3, because we're talking with Dan Te Whenua Walker yesterday, and part of what he talked about is all the different things that Microsoft have done around him being a global co-chair of Indigenous and all the other activities around te reo and use of the language, the keyboards, etc. But when he watched back this, the the subtitles, as he said, I think it was butchering te reo and creating English words from the sounds, of the Māori. And he said he's going to get onto that. So potentially, because this is how I learned Italian, and when I share for anyone learning languages, you watch a program spoken in the language. So I watch Friends, the TV show, in Italian with the English subtitles, and I find that having the subtitles you can read helps correlate. So, for example, I was watching the Kōrero show for Mike Roberts' story last night, and they did that throughout, and I was able to understand so much more te reo than I ever thought I did. It actually
Awesome.
is. So for me, it's that celebrate your small successes. I was like, oh, actually, I'm piecing a lot more of it together now. Not that I can speak it, but the first thing for me is always understanding it, which is the first step to then being able to speak more back, rather than just using words in English sentences. But I think to your point, over time, it would be lovely to see it migrate through bilingual to full immersion, because by the time it's at full immersion, that'll be the time that the country and the people are ready for it, and it's the natural progression. So that in the future, we will go to events, not just by Māori for Māori, but events go to an AFQY that's just te reo spoken. Like, I think that's what my thinking I'd love to see. But this is about your thoughts. So let's have a look at that question 3, because I've been stealing all your ideas, and all your comments have driven my thinking. But the third question is, what is the future for te reo in your perspective? Like, what would you like to see happen? What would you love to see happen? What ideas do you have? What, around Māori hangaro or metaverse? What sort of thoughts have you got that you'd like to see happen?
Yeah, I guess it's sort of similar to my my thoughts and, I guess, philosophies around our participation and representation in tech, right? So more visibility and representation, basically. And that's like, I'll harp on about that until the cows come home, but I feel it's the same for te reo as well. More visibility, more representation, although we're a lot further along the continuum here in Aotearoa New Zealand than we are 50 years ago, when the the Māori language petition was delivered to to the steps of Parliament. I think yesterday, or was it today? 14th of September. Anyway, 50 years ago is when the petition was delivered. Yeah, we've progressed a lot, obviously, but I still think there's a lot more work to do. I mean, from what I'm seeing anyway in my circles, I think it's a bit of a mixed bag in terms of the way that New Zealanders and their response to the Māori language. I mean, you see some people, particularly non-Māori, that are trying to learn, that are subscribing to te reo classes, which is awesome, amazing. But then you see other circles and other spheres where they're just completely ignorant and there's just pure racism. Like even just recently, it's just really, there's still a lot more to do, I think, Ryan.
So I don't know if it's a discussion for today, but I have been thinking about it because, again, it came up in the Kōrero show last night when Michael Roberts was talking to Orini, and just the week before Te Wiki Aotearoa Māori, and there's an article how she responded to one of her racist abusers for the first time, and I actually thought, and I'm really pleased to see that happen. But of course, the danger is you don't want to antagonize someone to go crazy or do anything more than be a keyboard warrior. But my point leading to here is, what is the problem? And I know that's like almost like a cliched throwaway line, but I've been really thinking about it, going, what is the problem here? It's learning a language. It's like there's something more behind it that they're not saying or doing. There's this barrier that needs to be explored to be able to break it down.
Yeah, like I think you mentioned at the beginning of this kōrero, Ryan, it's just lack of education, I think. And through lack of education and also misinformation comes ignorance, basically. So, and I feel that, a part of normalizing te reo and just general public and those sorts of public spaces is a big part of us trying to normalize te reo to a point where people are more exposed to it, and I guess it's more for the benefit of non-Māori, and also because they're exposed to it, there's the opportunity for them to be educated, to learn. Now, if they choose not to respect or appreciate the language, even though they've received the opportunity to be educated and be informed, then that becomes ignorance. So it's a little bit, if I might just use Arataki cultural trials or the mahi we've been doing in the digital storytelling space. I mean, a big part of our motivation in sharing these stories at place at all of these wonderfully culturally significant sites around New Zealand was to provide the opportunity for all New Zealanders to be to hear the stories, to learn, to be educated, to be informed. And we've been doing that for the last 5-6 years now, and so it's exactly the same approach. I feel the more we use te reo in public environments and also in our daily communications, email, online, speaking, in person, in Zooms, whatever, the more becomes normalized, the more hopefully it will become accepted. But I think there's always going to be those factions of our community, should I say, particularly here in Aotearoa New Zealand, that will have just that they won't understand no matter how you present it to them. They just won't understand.
I present it as the bell-shaped curve of people, and at one end there will be that extreme, but balanced at the other end, the opposite extreme, with most in the middle. And I think you're right. When I talk to non-Māori and explain even just the language situation, and I just refer to it as the language eradication program. I don't know if I actually read that on one of the web pages, but the government pages are very sanitized. They don't actually go into the detail. But on my opening post, I said to a mate when I was first starting to learn te reo, I was like, "Oh, you can speak reo with me." Had no idea, literally no idea. Like, that's how ignorant I was. And he joked and went, "Don't talk to the
Yeah,
devil's
yeah,
language
yeah.
to me." And I was like,
Yeah, yeah.
"What the?" Like, I flinched.
Yeah.
And that's when I first learned about the truth. So if you think about it that way, when I explain this to other people, they are gobsmacked, and I think it softens some of the media fueled anti-ignorance towards Māori, because it's negative news for one reason or another. I won't put any labels or examples in, but for years, like I grew up as when I was a little kid, so what I was about 4 or 5, and Bastion Point was on, and then the news story there. And then I learned from Te Araha Grace that that land was gifted from the Ngāti Whātua Warakai to the government back when there was a Russian sub supposedly in the harbour, and they wanted to put war emplacements on. And just over time, because pretty relaxed culture, nothing was really said or done. But then when they tried to sell it off and sell it to people that would pay a fortune to live in the best view of rangitoto, that's when they said, "Hey, hang on." But that length of time meant that there was people that were born that weren't even alive when it was gifted. Not gifted, that's not the right word, because that's almost like keep, but lent. That's probably the better word. So people didn't understand. So they go, "Oh, bloody Maori trying to get their hands on stuff that's not theirs, rah, rah, rah. Why don't they just move on?" And it's like, well, actually learn the truth. And I always do this. I always put them in the situation. So I go, "Okay, this is your house. Imagine someone comes along and you let them use the lawn, but then a bit later on, they come into the lounge and then they take over your bedroom. The next thing, you're on the lawn. In fact, you have to move off the lawn out of the property." And you put into context like that, and they start going, "Oh shit, yeah, I see." So yeah, I've always been keen to see some more formalized education program from the government, just like we did all the COVID advertising. You got to wear masks, you got to do this, you got to get your boosted. Like, I think there could be a series of informative educational ads that just touch on a simple subject each time, that layer in the history. And look, while I'm on fire here, I just want to add one more thing. The thing that really pisses me off is when non-Māori go, "Oh, but what about the musket wars? They all tried to kill themselves, or they killed each other." And I go, "Okay, let's go back to Anglo-Saxon time and 1066, which is actually the year that the Vikings invaded. I might have the date wrong, and someone will correct me, but every race has done this to each other. The Norwegian versus the Swedish Vikings versus the Russians, who were the Prussians originally, versus the Germans. So you could say, well, what's your point? Because everyone's done it, But anyway, I'm going to start wrapping up here, and I'm going to give you some time to think of some closing remarks. I'll just do a little bit of a summary. And, tēnā koe, first of all, for all your time and input. And we've had Lee Timutimu, who's given us a recap from our 2020 series, where he initially shared about his personal journey with te reo, which, as he described, is a bit of a roller coaster with some full immersion, then full unimmersion, then the kids re-invoke the passion and the realization. And now, of course, working very heavily in organizations, or creating organizations like Te Mataora, which is the Māori Tech Association. And of course, this is, I'll just add this a little bit in and then hand over you. I think another thing people struggle is why do you need a Māori Tech Association or a Māori this, anything? There's already the all-encompassing governing body for everybody. And it's a really important concept for people to grasp. And it was actually at the Aotearoa AI Summit with Megan Tapsell, who's the chair, but she had her niece speak, and she's a accomplished, there's a name for the group, auditor, but she did a poem, and it talked about the fact that through history, there have been promises made but not delivered, and there's a real history of Māori not having a seat at the table to co-design, and therefore it's not incorporated their needs. And that's exactly the point. having a Māori Tech Association incorporates Māori needs. And again, it's one of those things where it's flip the needle, where everyone goes, yeah, but the all-encompassing thing is for everybody. And it's like, yeah, but it's basically done by Pākehās, and it fits Pākehās thinking, the way that people do it. Let's take into account Māori do things differently, and they would have it done the way that it recognises them, just as the Treaty of Waitangi says. But that's enough for me. I'm going to hand over to you for closing remarks. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Yeah, it's been a good kōrero once again, and I guess just as we've been speaking, had time to reflect and have had time to think. But I guess my closing words are really just around those of us who haven't yet mastered our language, te reo Māori. I'm one of those people. I'm one of those Māori, should I say. I just want us to encourage us to be strong, to walk confidently within your own mana, within your own space. Don't let anybody sort of make you feel lesser because you don't have the language. Don't let people minimize you, and that's both Māori and non-Māori, by the way, because you don't know how to speak your own language. I think we're all on a journey, and we go at different times, and that journey is going to take, it's going to be realized at different times for all of us. And I know for a fact that myself, I will definitely return to learning my language. I'll never be a master of anything, but I'll definitely be a student of something that is very important to me, which is my language. So yeah, I really just want to encourage those of my community that that might not have the confidence at the moment to even utter a few words of te reo. Just give it a go. You'll only be supported, especially for myself, and for those that might minimize you, they're not really worth the time anyway. So I just want to say that we are actually creating these, Katie Brown and I actually are creating these cultural support frameworks that will, amongst other things, support all of us as a digital and tech community, Māori community it is, in terms of te reo, but also in terms of tikanga, waiata, and all of these things that we need support with, especially those of us that are small business owners that don't have the time, resource, or people to support us in that way. So we're actively creating something. We call it Te Hapori Matiko, and it's not a new thing. In fact, I've chucked it up on LinkedIn quite a few times. But that was one of the things we went out and asked our people in our Digitech community, what are the things that you need? And one of the things they have asked for is a cultural support system that will enable them to learn, to grow. And te reo was one of those things that we hope to support them with on their journey. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Well, that is a beautiful answer to our question 3, the cultural competence. What was the last word of the name?
The name of the community that we're setting up, did you say?
Oh, it is a community? Sorry, I thought it might have been a sort of product. My apologies. But yes, that is your answer, or part of your answer for question 3. So we'll put the link again into the chat of this one so that people can continue to grow and grow with the community and get into the community, because that is, I think, comes back to your point when we're talking about your Rio journey my Italian observations, is we need to have the opportunity to speak it regularly every day, as much as any other language, or English, which we probably all is the other language we will either speak. So once again, tēnā rawa atu koe. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure, and we'll let you get back to your day. And thank you for sharing everything you have today.
Kia ora, tēnā koe, Ryan, and ngā mihi kia koutou.
Ka